Okay, I want to talk today about reactions to, well, the situation that we've been describing gradually that has evolved over the 19th century. We've seen that the 19th century was a time of tremendous change, tremendous affluence, industrialization, people leaving the farms and the countryside to go to the cities, to work in factories. That brought a lot of social problems along with it, but it also spread affluence through an unprecedented range of society, so that by the turn of the century, a lot of people now had significant amounts of disposable income. There was a large middle class. Things were very different from what they had been 100 or 200 years before. Now, you might think that that spread of affluence, the lowering of the cost of living, food was much less expensive than it had been, all sorts of other goods were much less expensive. You might think that overall, increased incomes, a decrease in what you had to spend, made people happier. And overall, I think that's certainly true. But among intellectuals, it tended to provoke a different kind of reaction. It did involve tremendous social change, an alteration of patterns of living that had been going on for centuries, and the result of that was some degree of intellectual turmoil. But yes, let's talk some about some of these reactions. We've seen Marx rebelling against the injustice that he perceived in the early part of the Industrial Revolution. We've talked about other kinds of responses, Nietzsche's relativism, for example, and Doyle's affirmation of realism. But today I want to look at a different set of reactions, a set of reactions that involve a kind of loss of faith, a question that starts out with a kind of puzzlement and ends up in cynicism. Let's start with Matthew Arnold. He wrote a very famous poem, Dover Beach, in 1867. That was the same year that Marx and Engels published Das Kapital, their great work on economics. And Bismarck also organized the Northern German Confederation and began to unify Germany into a single country. Modern Europe, in other words, began to take shape around this time. It was a time of tremendous social change. In the United States, of course, we had just been through a civil war, but Europe itself was about to enter in just a few years a war between Germany and France. There was a great deal of unsettled dynamics taking place in Europe. And this poem is in a way a very quiet poem. By the way, those are actual scenes of Dover Beach. You can see them back there. Here's how the poem starts. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast, down in the tranquil air. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. All right, tell me about the opening of the poem.
Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful, calm, right? Sweet is the night air. You look out, the sea is calm, tide is full, the moon is there. The light gleams and is gone on the French coast. What is that from?
Is that one of those lighthouses?
Ah, perhaps it is a lighthouse. Yeah, there's a sort of, I mean, that's the light is there, but then it goes out. If it's a lighthouse, it's coming back, but of course it's not quite clear what it is. That's a little glimmer of, worry perhaps on this. But otherwise, the cliffs of England stand. It all seems great, right? Tranquil. Life is nice. Everything's good. But it continues. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land. Listen. Now, so far, everything's great, right? And in fact, the circumstance of this is that Matthew Arnold has just gotten married. He's there on his honeymoon. And so he's talking to his young wife, saying, oh, look how beautiful it is. But being married to Matthew Arnold must have been kind of a bummer. Because, look, sweetie, look how beautiful it is. But then what? Listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles, which the waves draw back and fling at their return upon the high strand. Now, how about that? It's sweet, it's tranquil, everything's nice, and now you hear, I want to hear shh, shh, kind of like those those things that people put on when they have trouble sleeping, these background noises. You're supposed to be hearing the soft, gentle waves and so on. But no, you hear the grating roar of the pebbles being tossed. Okay, begin and cease, and then again begin with tremulous, gay and slow, and bring what? The eternal note of sadness in. So what a bummer. Look how beautiful it is, sweetheart. Look at this. Oh, listen to that grating. Oh, what a bummer. Okay? So tell me about what's happening here. Why is this note of sadness coming in? Why the raging roar? What's going on here?
Social upheaval?
Well, okay, we can start going far beyond what's there on the words of the page and saying maybe there's social upheaval. Certainly notice he's sensing something that isn't right there on the surface. He looks at the surface and says, things are beautiful. The air is sweet. Everything's calm. But now he starts paying more attention. He thinks, well, not everything is actually calm, right? Wait a minute. Things are getting tossed around. I'm hearing this roar. It starts and then it stops. It's tremulous. What does that mean?
Without stopping.
Well, it's not just without stopping. What is tremolo in music? Yeah, it's kind of it's this, just this kind of thing. Sort of starts and stops. It's slow. It brings in this eternal note of sadness. So now we get this sense that, wait a minute. Under the surface, there's something brewing. There's trouble brewing. But so far, we don't really know what it is. Now, he starts remembering. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean. And it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound of thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. So he recalls Sophocles, a Greek poet, okay? And he's thinking of Sophocles also hearing this eternal note of sadness in the Aegean Sea. So imagine Sophocles there on the Greek coast, there observing the sea, but he too hears this, right? And it brings into his mind this turbid ebb and flow, again, like the tremulous nature of this. Okay? But of human misery. And that produces a thought. Now, so far, do we have any idea what this thought is? Things look great, but we listen to the surface and we hear this human misery. But yeah.
I mean, like, it's like a prelude to, like, human warfare and stuff, I guess, because, like, I don't know, with the Greeks, like, I don't know if they're talking about, like, the Spartans versus, like, Troy or something, but I don't know what, time period that is. But, the Greeks fought a lot, and they're talking about the Europeans about to be fighting a lot, I guess.
Ah, okay, good. Yes, if we turn back to what we saw here, right, the pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return, we find two things, I think, happening. You're right to think conflict, okay? He's aware of the fact that there's a lot of conflict under the surface. He's recalling something, and we'll get to this in a moment, which is the Peloponnesian War. And so he's remembering this era when the Greeks were fighting against each other, when the city-states were in a state of conflict. And so he's aware of that. There's that note of conflict just under the surface. But also, notice this begins and ceases. The pebbles are being tossed around. There are large forces at work here, right? And the little ones, the pebbles, you and me, in other words, we're just getting tossed around by these forces. Does the pebble understand the waves? No, right? It's just getting tossed around. It doesn't understand it. It's making this grating roar, but it's not aware of what's happening. And so he's basically saying, yes, conflict, but also there are these large forces at work, and we don't really understand them. We're getting tossed around by them. We're powerless to stop them, just like the pebbles against the waves. And so the thought becomes what? Well, here's where he tries to fill in the details of the thought. The sea of faith was once too at the pole, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle pearl. Okay, the sea of faith. What does he mean by the sea of faith?
Like God?
Ah, okay, religious faith. Okay, so that's part of it, right? A belief in God. And so once too, that was at the poles, and round earth, it sort of lay around us as a kind of protection. Now, in what sense would religious faith be a sort of protection? What does religious faith give someone?
Reassurance.
Ah, reassurance, good.
Also, like Marx talked about how the society of the masses, it kept everyone in line, gave someone a guideline of what was morality and what wasn't, so people followed that guideline. They didn't have to worry about people disagreeing. Most people would listen and do as they were told.
Okay, good. There are two things in what you're bringing out. She said, remember Marx talked about religion as the opiate of the masses. Interesting that we then read Doyle, where he talks about Sherlock Holmes being an opium addict. And so, what does opium do for you? Ooh, it relaxes you, so it comforts you, makes you feel that things are okay, takes your mind off things, sends you often into these dreams. Okay, so that's one thing, and Marx means it primarily, look, it's a distraction from things, but it's also a comfort. Now, The second thing that she points out, and by the way, I don't mean in that sense to endorse what Marx is saying, but a lot of people who take religion very seriously say one of the things that's a great benefit is it's a comfort, okay? It suggests there's this larger meaning. The world isn't just sort of sitting out there alone, it's enveloped in this larger sort of story, in this larger meaning. And so that's one thing that religion gives you. It gives you not only a reassurance, but a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. And the other thing you said is it gives you guidelines, okay? It tells you something about how to live. Well, the sea of faith was once full, so people had this sense of meaning. They had this sense of comfort. They had this sense that there was a bigger picture. And even if they were being tossed about by the forces of the waves, nevertheless, there was some larger purpose to that. Also, they had guidelines. What should I do about it? Well, there were general rules to follow. But now, he says, I only hear its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind. So now he hears that sea of faith retreating. What gets lost in with that? If that sea of faith retreats, what else do we lose? Pebbles, well, no, we're not pebbles. Go ahead. Ah, hope, yes. Hope, a sense of meaning, that sense of comfort, that sense of reassurance. Yeah.
I was going to say a sense of direction.
And good, the guidelines. We don't have the guidelines. We lose a sense of direction, right? Not only are we no longer confident that there's a larger purpose, but now we don't have any guideposts by which to sail. To use Nietzsche's metaphor, we no longer know which way is which because we don't have any sense of where the whole thing is going. And so the sea of faith retreats, he says. Basically, we're in trouble. We're down to the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. In other words, it's no longer infused with a sort of purpose. It's no longer clothed with some kind of meaning. Now we're just looking at the world as if it's this strange, alien place that doesn't have any intrinsic purpose or meaning. And now it's not obvious what the guidelines are, right? So what do we do? How do we live? Well, we used to feel confident that we knew that. And now all of a sudden we lack that confidence. So what's his response? He says, and this is the most famous part of the poem. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. So he's recalling this phrase from the Greeks. The whole image here, I want to say, is really from Sophocles, where he's talking about armies that are fighting a battle on the seashore at night. Okay? It starts out light, but then they lose the light. The battle continues, but nobody can see what's going on. And so nobody's sure who's friend, who's foe, who to attack, who to befriend. Nobody understands what's happening on the plain. It's just this confused struggle in the dark. And he's basically saying that's the situation we find ourselves in. Okay, it used to lie before us like this land of dreams, beautiful, new, but in fact, notice, now it's a cold world. There's no joy, there's no love, there's no light, no certainty, no peace, no help for pain. So notice these are all the things that the sea of faith gave us. At least it gave us the hope, the dream of these things. But that's gone. Right? So here we are on this darkened plain by the seashore, confused alarms of struggle, flight, ignorant armies are clashing by night. So he's looking out there saying, this world no longer has any purpose. It no longer has any meaning. It's no longer clear what we're supposed to be doing or who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. It's just this confused struggle. Reactions. Yeah.
More of a question. Okay. If there's neither joy nor love nor light, and he's basically incredibly melancholy about this entire thing, then what's the point of being true?
Good question. Love, let us be true to one another. For nothing means anything. There's no joy. There's no love. So yeah, there is something pretty bizarre about this, right? It's like, sweetheart, come enjoy this beautiful night air with me. There's no joy. There's no love. So let's be true to one another. Okay, there's something odd about this, and people have made fun of it. This is Anthony Hecht's poem called The Dover Bitch. So there stood Matthew Arnold and this girl with the cliffs of England crumbling away beneath them, or behind them. And he said to her, try to be true to me and I'll do the same for you, for things are bad all over, etc., etc. But, I mean, that turns into a joke, but I think it's a serious question. We are going to see some philosophers in the 1920s in Britain who say, look, yeah, we've lost any sense that the world has any purpose, the sea of faith has retreated, so what do we have? We just have each other. We just have personal relationships. We have love, we have friendship, we have personal affections, and that's it. Here, it looks as if what he's saying about that is confused, right? Because initially love, let's be, here's what I expect to happen with that phrase. It's sort of like, well, at least we have each other, sweetheart. We look out here, as long as we just look at the surface, things look great. Listen more carefully and you realize the world's nothing but a confused mess. Things are bad all over, but at least we have each other, right? And that's the way I'd like it to end. I'd like this Hollywood endings where it's, at least we have each other. Oh, yes, right, they embrace, they kiss. The end, okay? But that's not how it ends. It would be great if it ended right there, but no. Okay? Or even here, right? It lies before us like a land of dreams. So let's just stay in the dream. But no, no, no. He says, the love, the romance, all of that, that's just a dream. In fact, there's no joy, there's no love, there's no meaning. It's all a confused mess. We're even a confused mess. But now, if that's right, we've lost all guideposts, right? I mean, so how is that relationship even something that can serve as any guide? Yeah?
I think when I read it, him talking about the world has neither really joy or love or light doesn't necessarily apply to him. And the person he's talking to is why he says, why he entreats her to remain true to each other, because the world before us lacks all of these things. And so this is the only safeguard we have against this world which is crazy and strange and doing bizarre things. That those two aren't necessarily connected.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that would be one way of trying to reconcile this, to say we are here as on a darkening plane, but now are they fighting? Well, no. They're there like on this plane where ignorant armies are clashing by night. They're not saying they're part of the armies, right? And so one way of looking at this is to say they're standing on a balcony overlooking the beach. They're there on their honeymoon, apart from the world, and they stay apart. They're like spectators here on this darkening plane. They're not participants. And so that would be one way of trying to reconcile this, saying the participants are down there, and for them there's neither joy nor love nor light, but we're not really down there fighting in those armies. We're up here observing. And so maybe there's a place where we can stand and be true to one another and not get caught up in the fight that's confused and happening down on the beach. That might be one of the ways of doing it. Say there's the world as it is out there, where all of them are involved in these confused struggles, but maybe we can stand apart from it. And indeed, that's what artists have often tried to do, right? Stand apart from it. Say, look, I'm not speaking as a participant now. I'm speaking as someone who steps back and tries to describe what's going on out there. And as long as there's an in here to contrast with out there, maybe that's one way in which we could reconcile these ideas. Yeah?
Is it unfair to say it could just be an intentional alliance? Like, even if his logic absolutely applies to their interpersonal relationship, that doesn't mean he's going to acknowledge it as common. Like, almost any human has a need for bonds and interpersonal relationships. Like, people are aligned their logic all the time when it applies to one. So.
Okay, well, it could be that he just doesn't notice the contradiction. That's true. A huge amount of effort gets spent in philosophy and literature and in history and ordinary relationships, assuming that what the other person is doing makes some underlying sense. And sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes people are really confused and things don't make sense. Or things are random, and so that's one way of doing it. Maybe he doesn't realize the contradiction. But another way of taking that is to say, well, wait a minute, maybe he does. Maybe he's saying, the world seems like this in a land of dreams. Actually, it's not. But maybe to bring the thought back. So let's stay in this land of dreams. Let's don't go out there on the beach. Let's stay on this balcony. Now, don't think of it as just as pure spectators. Just think, there's this land of dreams, the way the world seems to us. Here's the way it really is. Let's hang on to the way it seems, because that's at least something. And so that would be a way of trying to sort of bring these together, saying, yeah, if there's a world of dreams, it's beautiful. There's the real world, it's awful. So let's dream on, right? That might be a response. Yeah?
But wouldn't that create new conflict between what he wants and what he needs? So wouldn't that conflict just extend further and then pull him into the idea of conflict?
Wouldn't it pull him into the idea of conflict? In other words, how long can you expect that dream to last, right? I mean, here's the thing about dreams. They end. You wake up. And so you might think, to say, let's keep dreaming, well, that's fine for a while, but that doesn't seem like a long-term strategy of reconciling these. That seems like something that eventually you have to stop doing. After all, honeymoons end. It might be, oh, let us be true to one another. Let's ignore that awful world out there. But then, the honeymoon ends. You have to go back to it. Yeah.
I think like you keep saying like that he's implying they should just like, you know, be, I guess, blissfully ignorant of what's real or like dream on kind of.
Right.
But I think he's just saying that they should just like invest in each other, and you know that I think that's a happy way of looking at it, I guess. But you know, just invest in each other, and that's it. So I think it's different than saying that they should just be dreaming and such.
Right.
So.
Well, okay, he might be saying invest in each other. I mean, why do we have to take it as a dream? Why can't we affirm what the British philosophers will later do, the value of personal relationships? Really, I would like that as an interpretation of the poem completely, except for that one word, which is love, okay? If that didn't say love, if that said something else, I would be totally with you and agree that makes good sense. He's saying, look, we have each other. That's something the rest of the world makes no sense, but at least we can make sense. We have each other. That one word makes it hard for me to think that's the full story. Though, of course, you might be right that that's part of the story. Yeah?
To me, it seems that he's separating like us from like the world. Like the world really won't ever offer us love or joy or peace, but only other people can offer you love or joy or peace. So let's be true to one another because that's all.
Oh. All right, that's a very interesting way of trying to combine it. What he said is, look, the world doesn't offer you joy or love or light or certitude or peace or help for pain, but that doesn't mean another person can't do it, right? And so maybe the thought is, look out there. Out there isn't joy or love or light or certainty or peace or relief from pain, but maybe in here there can be. Maybe we can supply the joy. Maybe we can supply the love, the light, and so on, at least for each other. And so that would be a way of trying to say, yeah, it's not necessarily that we have to stand apart from all that, but the source won't be out there. Maybe it has to come from inside us. And so one way of taking this is to say, now that the sea of faith has receded, we seem to have lost a lot. It's not going to come back from the world. It's not going to come back from this thing that is enveloping the world. If it's going to come from anywhere, it must come from inside. Okay? And so that would be one way of trying to reconcile this. Say, really, we're the source. You and I, sweetheart, we're the source of joy. We're the source of love. We're the relief for pain. We're not going to find it out there or get it anywhere else. We better supply that for each other. Yeah?
They're not true to each other.
What do you mean they're not true to each other?
I mean, they're not actually true to each other. Like, that's,
Oh, in real
that's
life?
just wishful language.
I don't know. Were they true to each other?
According to Anthony Hecht.
Oh, well.
If you want to go with his interpretation. I don't know. You could say that they are no different, that they just want to feel that they're different.
Well, it could be. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. Can you really sustain that? Can you sustain that attitude of aloofness? Can you really, by yourselves, generate this? Maybe or maybe not. Here's the way Yeats takes this. Well, it is sort of, yeah, there is an underlying cynicism maybe in this poem. I mean, mostly it's a note of sadness, but there is this attempt to be inspiring, and yet inspiring in the face of a confused world. Yeats responds to it in this way, thinking about the 19th century, thinking about Arnold's poem. He writes this: though the great song return no more, there's keen delight in what we have, the rattle of pebbles on the shore under the receding wave. So he's taking this poem actually somewhat differently from the way we've been considering it so far. Though the great song, what's the great song that returns no more? It's the sea of faith, right. There's keen delight in what we have. What do they have? Well, hope, each other, right? And what is that they have? Well, the rattle of pebbles on the shore under the receding wave.
Conflict.
Yeah, they have conflict. But they have the pebbles, right? If the pebbles represent human beings and the waves represent something like these larger forces that toss us about, well, at least you have the rattle of the pebbles, right? At least you have each other and the sounds that we make and what we can supply. The pebbles are still of value, even if they're being swept about on the shore, making sometimes unpleasant noises. Here, notice that roar, that grating roar, has been reduced to a rattle. The wave is receding, it's going out, but nevertheless, we can still delight in being pebbles on the shore. Okay, and so he's taking this as a kind of hopeful, well, at least we've got, I'd say, at least we have each other. At least we're pebbles, right? Maybe we're getting tossed about by these larger forces we can't understand, but at least we can delight in being pebbles on the shore. Okay, well now, the point of this, in some sense, however we choose to interpret the poem, is that there is this sense already by 1867 of a loss of faith. Nietzsche will not for several decades more announce the death of God, and yet you can already see in Matthew Arnold this concern that traditional ideas of God, of meaning, of the guidelines by which to live are receding or slipping away. And I want to stress again, it's not just religion, it's not just God, it's anything that can serve as a guidepost, anything that tells us what the meaning of life is, or gives the world a purpose, or tells us clearly who the good guys are and the bad guys are. All of that is receding. And so it's not just a question of putting in a secular substitute for this religious faith, it's really faith, period, faith in anything that they see as receding. By the time we get to George Bernard Shaw, we get a different sort of reaction. Because Shaw is not someone who just, wallows in this eternal note of sadness. He is not someone who says, well, sweetheart, at least let's be true to one another. Instead, he's saying, let's just laugh at things, okay? I mean, it can't be taken seriously, the sea of faith is gone, but at least we can make fun of the pebbles on the shore. And so it's a different kind of response. Now, a little bit about Shaw himself. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1925. He wrote many, many plays. He was a committed socialist politically and one of the founders of the Fabian Society. He won an Oscar for writing Pygmalion. That was later turned into the movie My Fair Lady, which you might have seen. And so he's very influential in British politics as well as in British literature. Now, what was this Fabian Society that he helped to found? It was founded in Britain in 1884. Its goal was to advance socialism gradually. It agreed with Marx and Engels about overall social conditions and about ultimate goals, but it said the way to this is not the revolution. The proletarians are never going to overthrow the current existing order. Instead, this has to be done gradually. Their symbol was this. Okay, FS standing for Fabian Society. What is that a picture of?
A wolf in sheep's clothing.
A wolf in sheep's clothing, exactly. You pretend to be someone who shares other people's values and just is concerned about little injustice here and there, when in fact what you intend in the long run is this total transformation. What are some of its famous members? Well, not only Shaw, but H.G. Wells, author of The Time Machine and other works, Havelock Ellis, a sociologist, Virginia Woolf, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, we will encounter her later, historian R.H. Tawney, Harold Lasky, a variety of other people. There are a lot of contemporary British politicians who have ties to the Fabian Society, Tony Blair and a variety of others. It founded the Labour Party, and many of the Labour politicians in Britain got their start in the Fabian Society. Now, here is a window. It is meant to represent the Fabian Society. At the top it says, we mold it nearer to the heart's desire. What are they doing?
Crushing the globe?
Yeah, they're smashing the globe. They're forging it into what they want it to look like. Okay? And here it says, pray devoutly, hammer stoutly. And here they are all praying to this stack of books that is too small here to really read. Let me see if I can blow it up. Oh, yeah, not enough pixels to really read it. But History of Trade Unionism is one.
Industrial democracy?
Industrial democracy, yes. Oh, that's not getting better. Yeah, never mind. But you can see it's sort of a secular religion, and it's an attempt to remake the world according to their own designs. Whoa, that was too far. Okay. Now, since the goal is socialism, we had better say some words about what socialism is. And here I will say that with respect to a number of the key terms that we encounter involving ideologies of the 20th century, socialism, fascism, communism, and so on, there's often no real agreement about how to use these terms. And so people will fight over whether so-and-so is a socialist or what socialism exactly is. And the same thing with fascism, the same thing with a lot of these terms. And in the end, people don't agree about the use of the term, so it's very difficult. In the course, I will try to embrace a definition so that we have some common language. But I should warn you right at the outset, I'm choosing a meaning that I think makes sense, but it's not as if there's any consensus meaning out there to match. Now, here's one common definition of socialism. The government controls property and the distribution of wealth. Okay, so it's not left in private hands. Who gets what is something that the government makes active choices about. They might do it directly, as in communism, by controlling the means of production. They might do it indirectly through regulation, through taxation schemes, through welfare programs, in a variety of other ways. Friedrich von Hayek, and I should point out he's an enemy of socialism, he's not a friend, but in a book called The Road to Serfdom, defines it this way: the centralized conscious direction of social forces to consciously chosen ends. The idea is this: the socialist thinks there's a certain way that society ought to be that is consciously chosen, and then social forces are directed towards shaping that ultimate end. It's something like an expression of what's contained there, deciding what that globe ought to look like, and then forcing it into that mold, hammering it to get it into the shape you want, directing for social forces to bring about that end. Now that's in contrast to a sort of free market idea where one doesn't have any consciously chosen end. Individuals do, but the society itself doesn't have to agree about the end. It just lets people pursue their own private ends. And so this is an idea of saying, no, we've got to agree about an end, and then we've got to shape things to bring that about. Well, anyway, Shaw remained a socialist until World War I, and then he became just more of a pessimist. The work we're reading he wrote in 1903 when he was still an ardent socialist. But by World War I, he started thinking everything's a mess. Actually, then he becomes more like Matthew Arnold. It's just a confused struggle, armies clashing by night. He says every people has the government it deserves. It's more to the point that every government has the electorate it deserves. The orators of the front bench can edify or debauch an ignorant electorate at will. Thus, our democracy moves in a vicious circle of reciprocal worthiness and unworthiness. And so he really started thinking politics just is a mess and can't really lead toward any goal, consciously chosen or not. Yeah?
What we read, he provided very little framework. It was pretty much all critique. So was he already transitioning when he was writing what we read, or were there other parts of the book which built off of his complete teardown of society?
Okay, that's a great question. Is he, even in 1903, already sort of starting down this path away from socialism toward an outright cynicism and pessimism? It might be. Throughout this, he, for the most part, is, after all, he doesn't say these things quite in his own voice, right? This thing is the appendix to a play, and it's supposedly the manual for revolution that one of the characters in the play, basically a Don Juan type character, employs. So is he really speaking for Shaw or not? Well, there's already that distance. And then you get him saying certain things like, yeah, socialism is really just charity with other people's money. It's giving away the labor of others. And that doesn't sound like a very socialist thought, right? That's kind of undermining socialism too. So really in these maxims you find things that express a cynicism about everything, about government, about politics, about charity, about all sorts of things. And so
for every revolution, it's not just one.
Right, so it really becomes a sort of cynicism about everything, including revolution itself and including the ultimate goal here. So I think you're right that in 1903 already there's some distance established. Okay, he's no longer quite as young as he was. He's already at that point close to 50 years old, and he's starting to recognize that just as you can poke fun at all these traditional values, you can poke fun in the same way at his own. Here's one of his famous quotations. The serpent to Eve in a play called Back to Methuselah, written after the war, says, you see things and you say, why? But I dream things that never were and say, why not? Later, this is actually taken as an expression of idealism on the part of Robert Kennedy, for example. But actually, here it's the devil speaking. There in a somewhat fictionalized version. Sorry, if you haven't seen the Simpsons version of the Gargantuan story, it's awesome. Anyway, yes, and so by the time you get to his final play, he's depressed about the mob, he's depressed about leaders. He basically says, yes, you can't trust government to do anything. Now, let's talk about his ideas in 1903 and discuss the maxims for evolutionists that he read. this is, as I mentioned, an appendix to a play called Man and Superman. Now, really, it's his take on the Don Juan story. The main characters are a guy who is trying to be Don Juan, basically sets out to use this woman, but then a woman who ends up trapping him into marriage. And so he's going into this unwillingly, trying to simply exploit her, but she is frankly smarter than he is, and so by the end he sort of finds himself marrying her despite himself, and sort of assures the crowd, listen, it might look like we're going to be happy, but I'm not happy now, and I'm not going to be happy, and so on. It's a play about the war between the sexes, and really Shaw's rather cynical view of it all. But the title comes from Nietzsche's idea that we are going to evolve from humanity into a kind of higher being. He refers to his ideal as the Übermensch, the Superman. And it's going to be a state beyond good and evil. We're going to reject all the values we take seriously now and adopt a different set of values. But Nietzsche says they all have to be determined afresh. We don't know exactly what those values are going to be. Well, let's take a look at some of Shaw's responses to current values. He doesn't really outline a positive vision of what the Superman is going to be either, but he does indicate a sort of critique, if you will, of existing values. Now, what are the values that he's really attacking? Here's one. Do to others what you would have them do to you. Okay, that's the biblical expression of the golden rule. Here's his response. Do not do unto others as you would they should do unto you. Their tastes may not be the same. Now, the golden rule itself. What role does that play in Christian thought, for example?
In general, this is what you should do. There's the guidepost we talked about earlier.
Good, it's the guideposts we were talking about earlier. Okay, there are a couple of places, and this is true not only of Christianity, but of almost all religions. There are all sorts of detailed rules, but then there are some basic rules. After all, it's very hard to keep all those rules in your head. Think about the Torah itself. In the Torah, there are 613 commandments. But it's pretty hard to keep in mind 613 rules. And so there are 10 that are singled out as big commandments. But even then, people wanted some general guidance. And so Jesus, for example, gives a summary of the law in 2 basic commandments, both of which are taken from the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And what are they? Good. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's sort of the horizontal one. And then love God. That's the vertical one. Okay, so there's an attempt to get a basic rule. In another place, it's the golden rule that serves as the exposition of the same idea as love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. That's supposed to be the basic rule that governs all human relationships. Well, Shaw's giving a criticism of it here. And so in this way, giving a criticism of, you might say, the basic Christian rule, or one version of it. And what is his argument? Their tastes may not be the same. Now, how is that an argument against the golden rule? Yeah.
You're a sucker if you follow the golden rule, but you might not follow it.
Oh, well now that's, all right. What he said is, you're a sucker if you follow the golden rule because the other person might not follow it. Yeah.
But what you think someone else would find as fun or like kindness, or they have a different view of it, like they may not take it as something that they want to have done to them.
Ah, good. Okay, what you want to have done to you might not be something they want to have done to them, right? For example, what's something that you would like someone to do for you?
Give me apple pie.
Give you apple pie. You want apple pie, you're hungry, you missed lunch, you think, oh, I want apple pie. Does that mean you should go around giving other people apple pie?
No, maybe it would.
No, right? I mean, they might not like apple pie, so in a way he's saying, look, their taste may not be the same. What you want isn't necessarily what they want. So if you think, I would like apple pie, so here's some apple pie, I'll give it to you. No, that doesn't make any sense. Can you think of other examples? What are some other things you might want that other people wouldn't want?
Well, I was thinking that an historical example.
Okay.
Imperialism.
Ah, okay, good. Think of a big historical example, imperialism. You might think, what would we want? Well, we would want the following kind of system of morality and law and government and blah, blah, blah. So we'll come into this country and assume that those people are suffering because they don't have it and give it to them. Well, they might want it and they might not, right? I mean, that might be a benefit, might not. It depends on whether or not their tastes are the same. And by this point, Shaw is actually quite critical of imperialism for just that reason. He's saying, wait, who are we to impose our values on them? So that would be a sort of example of this. Now, is there a response to this kind of thing? I mean, how good a criticism is it of the golden rule? Is there some kind of response one can give? The reason I ask is this. It's unclear how seriously we should take what Shaw's doing here. Is he just making jokes? Or is he making serious arguments here in the form of jokes? Yeah.
It's very literal, because, I mean, there's some basic needs that everyone has, so I mean, that's kind of...
Okay, he's taking it very literally. There are basic needs that everybody has, but then there are needs that, or desires that people, for example, it's not true right now, but suppose my back were itching. And I think, oh man, I can't really scratch my own back. I wish someone would scratch my back. Does that mean I have an obligation to go over to other people and start scratching their backs? No, right? Well, you might say, well, look, that's not what it means. It's not talking about that sort of transitory thing that, of course, is applying to you, but only now, temporarily, and blah, 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 like the desire for apple pie, or like a desire for somebody to scratch my back. I'm talking about sort of basic and abiding rational desires of human beings that I can expect you to share. Just as I wouldn't want you imposing your desires on me, so I don't want to impose my sort of transitory desires on you, but I recognize that being human beings, there are going to be desires and needs that we share. And so a traditional response would be, look, I'm not talking about tastes here. I'm talking about, you know, sort of fundamental needs, universal desires, and rational desires. Sort of awful example, I know of someone who was injured in a car accident. Someone decided to commit suicide. And they did it by going out on a motorbike and just driving in other cars and trying to be in a fatal car accident. And could they use the golden rule to justify that? I want to die, so I should kill other people. No, clearly not, right? And so it's not meant to be talking about that kind of desire. So in that sense, yeah, if you take it very literally, that's a good argument, maybe, but it surely isn't meant to be taken that way. Here's another example. Some biblical injunctions. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good. Here is his response. Never resist temptation. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good. Okay? Now it's a kind of cute little subtle turnaround here. He's saying don't resist temptation. How do you know what's good until you've tried it? Okay? My best friend in college, boy, I better be dating. This is going out on the web, so I've got to be careful here. Better disguise this. But anyway, he had a sister who was a sort of wild person in the 60s who ended up living in a commune and all of these things. And she would tell him about some of her disturbing adventures. And the one in particular was to say, have you ever made love to an incredibly obese person who just like covers you with their fatness? And he said, well, no, I never have. And she said, well, how do you know whether you like it until you try it? I mean, you gotta try everything, right? And that was her idea. This drug, sure, why not try that drug? I don't know, well, I won't know whether it's good until I try it. You know, that kind of thing. Oh, sure, let's try. Well, anyway, I won't say any more about that. Let's look at the other form of that basic summary law. Love your neighbor as yourself. Here's his response. Don't do that. If you're on good terms with yourself, it's an impertinence. If on bad, an injury. Okay, we'll explain.
Well, if you don't love yourself, then it's bad.
Right. If you don't love yourself, if you're like that guy who wants to commit suicide, then don't treat your neighbor as you're going to treat yourself. But if you treat yourself very well, then if I treat you, I mean, how do I treat myself? I feel hungry, so I go get something to eat. Well, if I feel hungry, shall I go get you something to eat? That seems bizarre, right? So, again, it's really a question of underlying. It's intended to talk about these basic universal things, not things like this.
I think
so,
the Christian might interpret it as giving your neighbor food.
Giving your neighbor food, but not necessarily that food now, and so on. So he concludes the golden rule is that there are no golden rules. But this really just starts the general cynicism. Here is a phrase from the Sermon on the Mount. Don't resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. He says, beware of the man who does not return your blow. He neither forgives you nor allows you to forgive yourself. Okay, what's so funny about that? Maria? You don't have to answer. Actually, there's something I do find funny about this one. Maybe nobody else gets the joke the way I do. Because in the Sermon on the Mount, what does Jesus say? He says that, but then he says, by doing this, you will be heaping burning coals upon his head. And so it's actually not just, come on, be nice, forgive. They burn down your embassy, say, that's okay, I've got another one. No, he's sort of saying, forgive, and that is actually going to be a worse punishment. And so it's actually, to some extent, you know, Charles saying, yeah, he doesn't really forgive you or allow you to forgive yourself. So in a way, that's a mean response. What Jesus actually says in the Sermon on the Mount, it's just like, you bet it is, man. That's the point. I mean to make you feel guilty. That's the strategy. Anyway, I'm not sure. That's why I sort of smile about it. But this is sort of an attempt again to, well, cast doubt on, make a joke about, refute something fundamental in Christianity. But it's not just Christianity, although those are some of the key things. There are lots of things he attacks. Decadence can find agents, only when it wears the mask of progress. Again, it seems like that's kind of poking fun to Fabian society that's all about progress. Every man over 40 is a scoundrel. He's writing this when he's about 50. If you injure your neighbor, better not do it by halves. In other words, don't just hurt him, kill him. Or he'll get you back. How about government, which the socialist thinks should be in control of so many things? Actually, he says the art of government is organization by idolatry. Right? So the populace can't understand the bureaucracy, it can only worship the national idols. The savage bows down to idols of wood and stone, the civilized man to idols of flesh and blood. So that doesn't sound very optimistic about any sort of law. Democracy, he thinks that's basically hopeless. We have no way of telling who would be a good leader, so it substitutes election by the incompetent, many, for appointment by the corrupt few. Liberty, he says, nothing can be unconditional, consequently nothing can be free. Liberty means responsibility, that's why most men dread it. Let's see, other highlights? Yeah, education. We professors do not escape unscathed. A fool's brain digests philosophy into folly, science into superstition, and art into pedantry. Hence, university education. He who can does, he who cannot teaches. Woody Allen adds to that, he who cannot teach, teaches Jim. Well, anyway, yes. Marriage is popular because it combines the maximum of temptation with the maximum of opportunity. Honor, there are no honorable men. Property, it's theft. Fair play, that's a spectator's virtue, not a principle. The principle wants to win. Reason, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And so on. Civilization is a disease. But I do want you to get to this last one, which is, I can't imagine a viler criminal than someone who would build another London, nor a greater benefactor than ancient destroyers. We're talking about civilization at its best point in 2,000 years. He says you couldn't do worse than to rip it apart and rebuild it. All right, next time we will look at the situation of the arts in the 19th and early 20th.